Good afternoon. It's I'll say welcome back. At least you've been watching live news. So Monday the 28th of April 2014, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome back to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Yeah, sorry for that technical hitch.
That's okay. And just to remind ourselves, the weather outside in Plymouth at least sunny with a lot of blue sky and a few fluffy white clouds. So somebody's got something wrong with the geoengineering there. Well, special day today. I've got my rat tie on. Those who look at the screen closely can see some fine selection of rats, appropriate as we're discussing really what's going on in Westminster and Britain's politicians. And we'll begin with Jeremy Hunt. And here it is from the Telegraph that Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt has been ripping into UKIP, saying the party is attracting racist candidates who are making disgusting comments. And in the article, he has this to say: people who want to vote for a protest vote party are angry. If you're angry, vote. And we understand that because we've just had the worst recession since the Second World War. And then I think he's saying, then vote for the party that represents the biggest change. So he goes on to promote the work of some of his colleagues. Look at what George Osborne has done with the economy since 2010. Look at what Ian Duncan Smith has done with the welfare state. Look at what Theresa May has done with immigration. These are big changes, and we would agree with you, Jeremy Hunt. These people have created huge change to wreck the country, hence the rise of UKIP. But let's have a look at this man. Well, the Telegraph got him pinned down because it pointed out that he'd just taken a £500,000 windfall in dividends from a company he apparently helped co-found in 1996 called Hot Courses. So there he is with a quick £500,000 in his pocket, and really doesn't it come down to this? Poor people, people with no jobs, people stressed on low incomes, old people with no pensions, immigrants in sweatshops, disabled people, war wounded. What do I care? I'm all right. And of course, this is the man who's helping to lever in particular, American massive private global companies to come in to take over our NHS. We don't have to make it up. It's the facts are all there in front of us, really.
In our faces.
So Mike's going to take us through some of that.
Well, indeed, because one of the things he highlighted was Ian Duncan Smith and how much he had done for the welfare state. So let's just have a look at some of this. We mentioned Lord Freud on Friday, having really what I wanted to highlight here again, the comment that he made, the claimant commitment redefines the relationship between job seekers and the state. And today we've got more evidence of that redefinition of the relationship between job seekers and the state, because the Department of Slavery is immediately following up with its new Help to Work scheme. So the question is, well, what is this? Well, they've got a nice little infographic to help us understand it. Long-term unemployed, well, I believe it's those who have been looking for work for more than 2 years will be required to attend a job centre every day, and they'll be pushed out into the community for what's being called a community work placement. Of course, they'll also get intensive support from the job centre, where the word support in this case is directly interchangeable with the word bullying. So they're going to get some intensive bullying from the job centre. And anyone not consenting to the slave labour will be docked money, as we said on Friday, because this is a new relationship. And of course, as we might expect, though it's not yet clear if people will actually be given this wonderful opportunity for slave labour, because according to this Freedom of Information answer, the DWP hasn't even completed the tender process for companies wishing to bid to run the community slavery project. Now look, many will say that it's just right that people who are work shy, that have been on benefits for 2 or 3 years, sitting on benefits, doing nothing, they should go out and work for the community, dig up the roads and all this kind of stuff. But what is actually going on here is nothing to help those people at all. What's actually going on here is that a big corporate, maybe A4E or G4S, will bid to be awarded millions of pounds in taxpayers' money to administer a scheme which pays nothing to the new slave, and that slave, as admitted by the DWP themselves in their evaluation for support for the very long-term unemployed, report will gain nothing themselves, so they'll get nothing from the exercise. The only people that are going to get anything from this exercise are the big corporates. So this is another opportunity for them to funnel taxpayers' money straight into a private corporation. It's more corruption, more bullying, more slavery, and let's not forget that if there is a monument or something that needs cleaning, that they're going to send these people out to do those jobs. If there is a monument that needs cleaning, then for every community slave that there is out there, then that's one paid job less for somebody that actually works for the council, for example.
Yeah. So if we just think through the reality of this, you're somebody who's lost your job, you're likely to be very tight for money or have virtually nothing. So we'll say you live outside an urban centre like Plymouth, and under this rule you're expected to get yourself into the job centre every day. So let's take an average distance. You're about 8 miles away from the city, so you're looking at a bus fare of around £4.50, and you're going to be doing that 5 days a week. So this is clearly a policy.
Of course they're going to be allowed to claim that travel expense, but of course then you've got to pay the company to administer the travel claims and all this kind of stuff. So it's just going to be millions of pounds into people's pocket, into the big companies' pockets.
Big companies' pockets. And the other thing, of course, we know that's happening inside the job centres on these courses is we're now starting to get particularly young job seekers reframed. So we've got the classic politicisation of the job centres coming in, and you bring in the NLP in the training so that the young unemployed can be gently manipulated across into the government's planned drone workforce. Well, that's it for people at the bottom end of the scale. But of course, if you are mega rich, then it's rather different. And the Mirror here pointing out the Formula One boss, Bernie Ecclestone, may have pulled off Britain's biggest ever tax dodge. And if you choose to go and read the article, and I think you should, you'll discover that the paper is saying, well, if we have a look at the sorts of money that he was moving around, he should have been liable to about £1 billion, but in fact there's been an agreement with HMRC for around about 10 million. So if you're super wealthy, and of course if you know lots of people in high places, particularly politicians, then of course everything's all right. So we can best sum it up here with David Cameron. What will David be saying? Well, good on you, Bernie. Taxes are just for the little people. Not for Bernie Ecclestone.
It's interesting that the BBC, Robert Peston on the BBC today has a blog post covering exactly this type of thing, because people are saying that the UK is the biggest tax haven on the planet, and Peston's posing the question: well, if the UK is the biggest tax haven on the planet, how come UK entrepreneurs have such a hard time with such a high tax burden? And of course, you've just summed that up with that particular story.
We're not talking the super rich. Indeed. And of course, if you're well connected with the Prime Minister or the political parties, then you can be sure that there must be some sort of let out for your tax woes. But we're going to solve this with points of light, I think, Mike.
Yes, points of light, the new award for community organisers. So if you're a Saul Alinsky type, and you like community organising and being a volunteer, then you get a new award, potentially, which recognises an outstanding individual. So people are making a change in their community and inspiring others. And David Cameron had this to say: in America, they have points of light. President George H.W. Bush spoke about 1,000 points of light shining out in difficult times. Britain is going to have its own points of light scheme.
Yeah,
there you go.
I think what he's talking about, actually, okay, it's Aesopian language, it's hidden language, but he's saying that we are going to get the big society working right down to ground level, grassroots level. So we are going to be recruiting particularly young people who haven't got jobs. If you look at all the big society material, it's there printed publicly. The government's looking to recruit and train hundreds of thousands of its Alinsky community activists. And I think these are the points of light they're talking about. It's getting the communitarian state operating at community level. Well, is the church going to do anything about it? Probably not.
No, actually, anybody that was watching Doomwatch on Friday night will have heard Sir Graham Bright, the Police and Crime Commissioner for the Peterborough area, pointing out that really police services need to be run as businesses these days. There's so little money around that you've got to run as a business, and that he was basically saying that his police service is not going to go out of business on his watch. Well, here we've got the Roman Catholic Church also acting in the same corporate style, and in fact giving away a sainthood to somebody now becomes a corporate sponsorship opportunity. And several, according to this report, an oil and gas giant, several banks, and Nestle, the organisation that believes that clean, pure water is not a human right. Nestle are among more than a dozen financial backers of the forthcoming event. Well, I'd just like to point out that St. Peter's itself, and this is a nice dome in St. Peter's. Well, in fact, St. Peter's is absolutely full of similar corporate sponsorship. So when that dome was being refurbished, Astaldi SPA was the company which provided the what's the word?
Project management or structural engineering, refurbishment.
What do you put outside a house when you want to climb up? What do you have outside your house? Scaffolding. Thank you.
Right.
Sorry.
I was doing quite well. This is
I was reading the Italian and the English word just went straight out. So yes, they provided the scaffolding for this refurbishment job, and of course, it really, I found quite disturbing. You're walking around St. Peter's and everywhere you go, there's another corporate advertisement.
Yeah. So could we have sort of Tony Blair or Gordon Brown put forward, for beautification?
Well, are they Catholic?
I would say so.
Okay.
We'll have a discussion on that after the programme. I think we're heading into trouble here, so we better move on with the schedule. Yeah, well, there we go. So, can we trust the newspapers to report what's going on? Well, we don't think that's the case either. And we're going to bring your minds back here to Cash for Questions. This is a little story that's been growing in the background for some time, and UK columns becoming particularly interested in this. So if you go back, this is to 1994, Tory MPs were paid to plant questions, says Harrods Chief. This was a story that exploded across the whole media spectrum. This is the gentleman that pushed it forward, David Henke, and here he is in the Press Gazette crowing that Leveson would have seriously damaged any Cash for Questions investigation. Well, that may be true, or it might not be true. But we've got very interested in this little website, which is called guardianlies.com, and it's been created by an investigative journalist called Jonathan Boyd Hunt, and he has been digging into the Cash for Questions scandal. He's produced a book on it, he's produced very detailed videos, and I understand that at the moment there is the potential of court action being taken against individuals who, according to Jonathan Boyd Hunt, were actually covering up what was really going on, and his allegation is that the Guardian created the Cash for Questions story. So if you go onto that website, you can have a look at the information yourself. There is a huge amount of information, and as the website says, we deal in facts, not theory. So they've got one of the front pages of the Guardian there on the left. But this is the nub of it, the cover-up. This website, it claims, proves that the British political controversy of the 1990s, the so-called Cash for Questions affair, was an invention. The evidence within these pages shows that the most influential newspaper in British society, the Liberal Guardian, had dreamt up the story in a bid to oust from power the Conservative government of Prime Minister John Major. Now, that is a pretty powerful claim. Of course, we've got the key people involved here, and we're bringing this man as well, who's mentioned repeatedly in this website, which is the Guardian editor, Alan Rusbridger. So we're going to say that if you're not aware of this website, you might like to have a look at it and have a read through the detail on the Hamilton and Al-Fayed connections, and then start to read a very different story about actually what went on to that which the Guardian published. And we'll be reporting more on this in the future. A lot of information has been passed to us over the last couple of months, and we're very grateful for that. So thank you for the source. Well, if we can't trust the Guardian, what have they been saying about overseas?
Well, of course, this is an opinion piece, so it's not a Guardian editorial as such, but nonetheless, they've published it. I just thought this was a staggering little piece from a guy called Steve Bloomfield. And it's really slagging off Russia Today. I just wanted to read a couple of bits out of this. Its reports on the UK include, he's talking about Russia Today, he's saying its reports on the UK include tales from austerity hit Britain, trenchant criticism of the war on terror, and views on capitalism more likely to be found at an Occupy rally than on a television screen. George Galloway and Nigel Farage are among its roll call of guests, and bankers are bashed on a regular basis. The crisis in Ukraine has provided the channel with a fresh opportunity to make a mark. Unashamedly pro-Russian, it has relentlessly pushed stories that portray the crisis in a very different light to that found on other news channels. Do you have anything? Do you think that is?
I think they're worried.
Well, this is my point, really. I mean, do you think he said anything there that is negative in any way? I mean, he clearly thinks it's a negative statement, but I haven't seen anything there. And then he goes on to say, according, for example, to Rory Suchet, RT's main news anchor, other news channels are controlled by financiers and corporations. It is all, he told me, part of the military-industrial complex, and he mused how some people believe there's too much Jewish money in America. There's an argument, he suggested, that Jewish money controls a huge amount of foreign policy in Washington. And then he goes on to talk about Hitler and various things. So he immediately tries to demonize and cast them. So it's absolute Alinsky tactics. And then he goes on to say, but propaganda for an autocratic government and conspiracy theories linked to anti-Semitism are not an alternative anyone should be comfortable with, nor, for that matter, is it something the television regulator, Ofcom, should ignore.
So this is The Guardian that deviously worked in the background to help promote the whole of the Leveson inquiry. This is The Guardian that at the moment is virtually running single-handedly the social networking which is going on around the government's big society. It's The Guardian that's taking millions of pounds in advertising from public and government sources. And here's the Guardian criticising other people for putting in a different view across.
Right, absolutely. But propaganda for an autocratic government, is that not the BBC?
Well, I would have thought so, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so the question is, who is this Steve Bloomfield guy? Well, it's very difficult to find very much about him. He's worked in Africa. He's written for The Guardian, The Observer, and various other places. But he must be some kind of heavy hitter because he was chosen to open the London Globalist Journalism in Action conference this year, which hopes to woo aspiring young propagandists. And Bloomfield's presentation was celebrating that, quote, there has never been a better time to be a journalist, he says, because of the curiosity of the new globalised citizen. I might say that I agree that there's never been a better time to be a journalist. Perhaps that's because of the levels of corruption and criminality among the establishment that we're seeing these days, which have basically never been higher, right? Yeah.
Well, what we've got to do is keep the truth and keep the facts coming out by every available means possible, and of course that is the alternative or free media. So if you haven't been talking about UK column news to other people, please will you pass it on and encourage them to have a look. Well, we maintain, and we've maintained for some time, that the biggest problem in the hierarchy of UK at the moment are the organised paedophile rings and the persistence of various governments in Britain to cover up the abuse of children, particularly when it's evident that politicians have actually been involved in the paedophile activity. So the Mirror here coming in pretty strongly with reports of a children's home in Angel Road. This is Lambeth. And it says, minister in Tony Blair's government was among a group of men suspected of abusing children at a home run by paedophile. Now, this is not Elm House, this is another case, and as they've dug into the story and they're talking about some 16 months research, what it's coming down to is another blatant cover-up by the police and the higher levels of the political establishment to protect their own. And of course, the key point here is that a senior politician working for Mr. Blair has actually been named. But as you will see, there's been quite an interesting chain of events around abuse at this children's home. So let's have a look at a UK column news diagram. We're saying yet another paedophile investigation involving a politician shut down. So this is Angel Road Children's Home. It was looking after particularly vulnerable children, 6 to 10 years old. And the first thing is we have a man with a paedophile record who was actually helping to run the place. He claimed to be an expert in counselling abused children, but as we'll see, there was a rather different story going on. There were other suspected paedophiles visiting, including the top politician, a police officer, and Lambeth social workers, and others. So a social services trainee who was working at the home in the early 1980s began to see strange things going on. Now, the newspaper report isn't clear about what was reported at the time, but as you will see, enough people made reports that something should have happened. And this is the key bit, that the top politician was observed taking children upstairs to a so-called annex flat where they were abused on numerous occasions. And one of the ladies who observed this, when she challenged the manager of the home, he said, well, what are you worried about? This guy's visiting other children's homes as well. So even local residents were telling the police that a paedophile gang was at work in the home. And a female victim of Carol actually told detectives in 1998 that a paedophile ring was operating from the home. What did Scotland Yard do? Well, very quickly they got in to remove the investigating officer, a detective inspector, Clive Driscoll. So he's taken off the case. Beg your pardon, I've done that before. It's obviously one of those days, Mike. Let's just run through that. Okay, so here we are. So Lambeth Social Services knew Carol was a convicted paedophile. He'd been convicted in 1966. And they found out, well, that they were aware of it in 1986, but they just left him in charge of the home for another 5 years. So no problems in Lambeth then. And if we follow it through, of course, what do? They shut down the home in 1995, all the homes. And the paper is reporting that the whole case has now been passed on to the Metropolitan Police Child Abuse Investigation Command.
So was the top politician actually named?
Not so far, but we understand there's some pretty interesting reports beginning to fly around the internet.
So this is not Cyril Smith?
No, this is not Cyril Smith, absolutely. Neither is it the politician who was named in the Elm House list. Of course, that has gone into total silence and the long grass at the moment. But now we've got another politician who was associated with Tony Blair.
Just before we move on, we were told the other day about the number of children that went missing from children's homes in the Torbay area.
Yeah.
And it was 370 last year?
270. Yeah.
But I mean, that's a staggering number of children to just disappear from care.
Well, the figure for UK as a whole is roughly 30,000 children. And of course, as a lady pointed out to me some time ago, the significant thing is that you do not see a clamour of parents saying, where are our children? There's no reports in the mainstream press. So these children have disappeared through a system. And of course, what is that system? Well, it is the child protection system, because once children go into that so-called care system, parents and guardians and relatives have no idea where they are in the first place. And here we're seeing yet more evidence of vulnerable children actually being placed in the hands of paedophiles by the very social services teams who are supposed to protect them. Well, if we come back, this is Detective Inspector Clive Driscoll. So once he was into the case, and as we'll see, he started to name politicians. And what happens with him? Well, he's rapidly pulled off the case, and then the next minute he's facing disciplinary proceedings. These are some of the comments made by Nigel Goldie, Lambeth Council boss in charge of child protection in 1998. He said there were some allegations that children were being abused by one or two prominent people. There were a lot of very senior people trying to put a lid on it. There was something very unfortunate about the whole thing was dealt with. And a former manager who alerted the police in 1998 said, "One wonders why Scotland Yard would be so desperate to stop it being investigated. I believe it was stopped because somebody in power was trying to prevent any further investigation into the politician." So just as with Chris Fay, who was talking about Elm House, and we've got many other people at the moment, Bill Maloney constantly shouting and warning about the paedophile rings operating at the heart of British society. It's all rather unfortunate, and nobody was too sure. Well, Dr. Goldie, the former Assistant Director of Social Services, also says in this article that he was summoned out to meet a police officer. We met the police officer in a cafe in Clapham, South London. They had an air of authority, like they were used to taking decisions. They asked if there had been any other allegations about the individual, and he's talking about the minister. Dr. Goldie described a second meeting with the same senior officer at the same cafe a few days later. He said they said essentially they saw it as fantasy. They were rubbishing Clive Driscoll's evidence. It was a closure job on what he was saying. They put a lot of pressure on me. I had to treat it all confidentiality. By that point, Clive had been called in and given his disciplinary notice. They said that Clive hadn't been able to provide them with evidence for the claims. Dr. Goldie said their manner was threatening and added, "I was told not to tell anyone or repeat it." It was heavy. So you don't need to make it up, do you? We've got the police coming in. They're not encouraging people to come forward with what they know. They're not praising their own police officers who are taking on these difficult cases. The aim is to protect the politicians. Well, of course, if we're talking politicians, we better come back to this man, Cyril Smith, and The Guardian here in a particularly flippant way suggesting, well, the council may have covered up an investigation. Greater Manchester Police apparently are now going to get involved. But if we look in the background and see what's been happening in the Lib Dems, the party president, Tim Farron, is quite widely quoted, and he said, "The party absolutely, as the Labour Party, must also, and indeed Rochdale Civic Society as a whole, need to answer serious questions as to who knew what and when." And we would say that, well, fine words, but what is Mr. Farron actually doing to help dig out these people in the Lib Dems? What is Nick Clegg doing?
Well, just about an hour before we came on air, Rochdale Council announced they were going to carry out an investigation into the Cyril Smith claims. But it's just going to be an investigation. They're not calling in the police. It's not really that serious as far as I can see.
Yeah, it'll be like an Oxford safeguarding team investigation where you simply draw in the evidence and then protect everybody's backs and then quash the whole thing. So the Evening News here, also featuring Cyril Smith, saying that the police are going to probe. I love this word. It's nothing to do with about a serious investigation. We're just going to prod the facts a bit. If it's too difficult, we'll leave it. So they're saying that the police are going to do something. And then, of course, we've got Lord Steele, who led the Liberal Party 1976 to 88, said he'll cooperate with any police inquiry. He believes there should be a fresh inquiry, but he didn't know anything about it. And if you read the rest of the reports from the Lib Dems, none of the other Lib Dems knew anything about this man. Well, here we have the Lib Dem voice, and my goodness, they're squealing. They're attacking the Daily Mail for pointing a finger at Clegg and the Lib Dems, but they're saying absolutely terrible that they've criticised Clegg for praising Cyril Smith in a tribute for his 80th birthday. And, well, Nick was only 12 when the abuse started, so of course he doesn't know anything about it. But of course he was told about a large amount of abuse by Bill Maloney, and on Budget Day, if viewers go to YouTube and look up Bill Maloney, Bradbury Pound and Nick Clegg, they can see Bill Maloney on camera saying to Nick Clegg, "I told you 4 years ago about the institutional paedophile abuse. What have you done about it?" And what does Clegg do? He simply walks away. Runs away. So this was the Mail's headline: "Why won't Clegg launch an inquiry into the Cyril Smith cover-up?" Paddy Ashdown knew nothing, of course. But then Clegg breaks, and now he's turned tail, and he's saying the police should investigate. We predict a massive cover-up. But of course, what is the substance of Clegg? Well, he's in trouble. UKIP looked like decimating the Lib Dems in the European elections. The papers are forecasting about 31% for UKIP in the vote. Clegg knows he's in trouble. The party knows Clegg's a liability, but Clegg says he ought to be Deputy Prime Minister until 2020. I think he can be Deputy Prime Minister, but we should find a nice little island for him in the middle of the Pacific where he can talk to the coconut trees. Nobody knew anything except the Crown Prosecution Service has said, note the language, Sir Cyril should have been prosecuted. So the papers are all talking allegations, but the Crown Prosecution Service at least is admitting that something should have happened.
But he's still Sir Cyril?
Sir Cyril, yeah, brilliant. And, well, the BBC's been crowing. We've shown this before. All of the people who basically have said, well, we didn't know that Savile was a paedophile. So we've got incompetent police, we've got incompetent security services, we've got incompetent ministers, we've got incompetent NHS, and yeah, nobody knew.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So that's the state of the country. Meanwhile, this is the penalty for people serving their country. So another 5 servicemen dying in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan in the middle of a country, most of them no idea why they're there. They certainly know there isn't a war to be won. So while these guys are giving their lives, we've got politicians at home, corrupt, working with the bankers, and of course, as we've now seen, protecting paedophiles. So we better bring in the Minister of War. He's not worried because he said, well, this helicopter's come down, but the commanders on the ground have said we're going to continue flying operations.
Mm-hmm. Right, well, a little advertisement for MI5 here because they're looking for Russian speakers. So the deeper you go into a language, apparently, the more you uncover. So they're looking for a Russian intelligence analyst for MI5. You'll be a core member of the investigative team. Your work will involve translating a wide variety of challenging audio and textual material from Russian into English. You'll listen to Russian language telephone calls and work with written documents. I wonder why they're particularly concerned about Russian language at the moment.
Well, could it be that somebody's poking a stick into the Russian bear at the moment? There are a few articles in the press at the moment pointing out that it's ironic at the stage that Britain's defences have been completely wrecked. We've got, of course, Cameron and Willie Hague and the rest of them busy causing trouble amongst nation states. And I believe there's a parliamentary committee at the moment, Defence Committee, which has started to say something's wrong. We had all of this focus on terrorism and so-called Al-Qaeda, and now we've got problems effectively on the Russian border. Well, we should have, because we started it, so at least we're getting value for money.
Well, just before we move from this slide, I do recommend people go and have a look at this, because near the bottom of this piece of text here, it says, see the day in the life page to get more of an inside view on the work of a Russian intelligence analyst. It's quite interesting to read that little piece, so I suggest people have a look.
Yeah, and if anybody is going to apply for that job, would you give us, tell us? We'd like to stay in contact with you. Right, well, businesses.
Well, this isn't really businesses. This is related to MI5, I suppose, because it's a new algorithm which is being promoted as something which is better than the human brain at interpreting faces, at recognizing faces. So this follows on from your report, when was it, last week or so, really pointing out the dangers of people getting involved in selfies and taking photographs of themselves and putting them on the internet and naming themselves. We can understand why, because media coverage today, not just on this website, a new algorithm being touted as better than the human eye at recognizing faces is being developed in Hong Kong with support from the Labelled Faces in the Wild database. And this is a data set of more than 13,000 faces collected from the internet without so much as a by your leave from the people concerned. So here's an example of some of the faces in the data set. And of course, as I pointed out last week, big data, according to The Guardian at least, is particularly powerful when it's powered by open data. And since the government in this country at least has dropped the idea of a microchip in our passports in favour of facial biometric information, and as we also reported last week, the government opening up its data sets, including HMRC. We've already got DVLA, NHS. No doubt passport information won't be too far down the road. Then this type of algorithm is going to have plenty of data to work on in the not too distant future. And
of course, if you own an Apple Mac and you've got the latest software, name escapes me.
iPhoto.
Well, yeah, if you're using iPhoto, then you'll find your Apple Mac is actually scanning all your photos to extract the faces from them.
And of course it then encourages you to name those faces, doesn't it?
It encourages you to name those faces, and then you're encouraged to upload it all to the cloud. So the system is right in front of me here. Just be aware of what this machinery is doing. But if the Apple Mac is working, problems with PC World?
Well, yes. Microsoft has for years been trying to get people off Windows XP because, of course, Windows XP doesn't have half the amount of snooping infrastructure as the subsequent versions of Windows did. So anybody that's still on Windows XP, if you're using Windows at all, then good for you. But this latest Internet Explorer security flaw puts XP users especially at risk. Well, this is another propaganda piece attempting to get people to upgrade. Frankly, if you're still using a PC with Windows XP on it, there are no security updates coming for it anymore. You want to be looking at putting some version of Linux on there, I would have thought. I can't imagine that there's anything that you can do with XP anymore that you can't do in Linux, and get away from these proprietary operating systems produced by Microsoft and Apple.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what we need to do is change the constitution.
No, in fact, what we need to do is to have a constitution, because Prospect magazine here absolutely touting the idea that it is time for a UK constitution. Britain has gloried, they say, in being the world's greatest exception for too long, ? The Scottish government will soon issue a draft independence bill, and it will include an interim written constitution. If Scotland becomes independent, this constitution will be modified, amplified, and ultimately ratified by a formal convention in 2016. And this person goes on to argue that Britain doesn't have a constitution. We've never ratified a constitution. and what a pile of nonsense it is. And I just wanted to say that if anybody hasn't yet seen the presentation that John Bingley gave to the British Constitution Group on the British Constitution, we will be playing that out for you just straight after this programme. So you want to know about the British Constitution, stay tuned after this. That's unless you're watching the repeat of this programme, which is on later on between the Crane Report and Fracking Nightmare, in which case you have to wait until after Fracking Nightmare to watch it. So there you go.
Okay. Right, well, we'll just say once again, and we're going to keep on saying that, of course, Robert Greene remains in prison in Perth, and at the moment he has still not got any progress on movement for a proper appeal to get him out on bail. This man has just been shut up with no trial, and of course, what is his crime? His crime has been to try and warn people in the UK as a whole about the operation of high-level paedophile rings. So it brings us back on our core subject today. If you haven't written to Robert, please do, and if you can send a stamped addressed envelope to make it easy for him to reply, that would be much appreciated. We hope to have some more detailed reports on what has been happening around Robert Greene probably towards the end of this week. We're still waiting for some information back from some of Britain's MPs who are prepared to communicate, but at the moment we haven't got the information we've been waiting for. Well, report the truth, get banged up, Mike.
Yep.
That sums it up. Okay, thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. And if you can or know somebody that would, please get people to subscribe to the UK column. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.